So it is getting to be winter here in the epic houseplant jungle, and what I wanted to do was give a couple pointers to you as far as what should you do with all of these plants when winter comes, season starts to slow down. How do we make sure that they're nice, happy, and healthy? So I put together 13 different tips and considerations for you. I want to get through them really quickly so you can get to them in your houseplant garden and really start to care for these bad boys. So let's go ahead and get into it. Tip number one is watering. We can reduce our watering frequency in winter by about half, just because our plants aren't growing as much. They're going into a dormant phase, which means they're using less of, more or less all of the resources that they typically would need to grow. So if I'm watering this wandering Jew plant, this Tradescantia zebrina here, maybe once a week, I might ramp that down to twice a month instead. Tip number two is actually the amount of water we give a plant when we do water it. So in the winter, not only are we watering less, but we're using less water when we water. So let's say, for example, this peperomia needed around a cup of water. I might give it 2/3 cup when I water it in the winter. Tip number three is, again, a watering one. When we water, make sure you're using water that is in that Goldilocks zone of just right as far as temperature goes. The last thing you want to do is throw some cold water into the root zone. It's just really not going to appreciate that. That's kind of a tip for gardening with houseplants in general, but especially during the winter, because you might leave some water out and then it might get quite cold and drafty, and then you hit your plant's roots with it and it just shocks the crap out of them. You really don't want to do that. Tip four, to remember that the direction of the sun or the path of the sun changes in the winter, which changes the way that light spills into your rooms, which means that you may have to reposition some of your plants come winter time. I would very highly recommend shoving all of the plants that are light-loving plants as close to the windows in your house as humanly possible to give them as much natural light as you can possibly afford. And then the ones that can tolerate a little bit less light, sacrifice those in a sense and move those a little bit further away. And it's really kind of a nice time to reposition, redesign, get a new aesthetic in the houseplant garden. Tip number five is you may want to rotate your plants. You can see this Syngonium here has really made a break in this direction, and that's because it's on my plant stand over here pointing towards the sun, which is right over here. So I actually have already rotated this once. I'm going to rotate it again. It's a good time in winter to do this. Let all of your plants kind of even out if that's the look you like. Personally, I do like that they kind of look even. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one like this, put it over here, and now it's going to reach towards the sun this way and balance itself out. Tip number six is to consider supplemental grow lights. I'm standing right now underneath my Soltech Solutions light, which is one of the more aesthetic indoor grow light options, especially for ornamentals, because while the performance is good, I would probably not use it to grow like edibles indoors like I would with some of the other LEDs I've reviewed on this channel. But this is a beautiful one that you can go ahead and just add to your garden. In the winter, our plants aren't getting as much light. If you do feel like you want to supplement, this is a really good one. Of course, there's many other options on the market as well, but it's just a consideration to give your plants a little bit more light. Tips number 7 and tip number 8, don't worry about fertilizing too much, don't worry about repotting too much. We don't have to fertilize because we're going into a dormancy season for almost all of our houseplants, so they're not really going to be needing nor using too much of that fertilizer if we were to add it. And it's kind of the same idea with a repot. You're not repotting in winter too often because they aren't growing that much and they won't really need to grow into that. I like to repot at the end of winter as we move into spring and fertilize as we move into spring, but as we move into winter, we don't have to do that. Tip 9, keep your plants away from any portable heaters or heating vents like that one right there. In the winter, especially in this house, it gets pretty dang cold. Sometimes I break and I have to run the heater. So I just make sure that none of my heat vents are blasting my plants as well as the ones on the ground, just because that's gonna drop the humidity. It's gonna kind of dehydrate them. It's just not a good environment for them to live in. On the flip side, tip 10 is to not keep them too close to a drafty window or an AC unit or anything that's blowing cold air as well. It's gonna kind of do the same thing, just in a different way. For example, I've got my portable AC unit right here. While I'm not running that in the winter for sure. If this was to kind of slide open, there could be a nice draft coming in and just not really being too friendly to my plants. So just do a quick scan, make sure that that's not going on in your houseplant jungle. Tip number 11 is to consider getting a humidifier, because in the winter we're running our heaters, our air is drying out even further, the humidity is dropping, and we're growing a lot of tropical plants which typically love humidity. And so you can just put a little water in the pot with some pebbles. That doesn't raise the humidity all that much. You probably should consider getting a humidifier. I'll leave a link down below to the one that I like a lot, but it's just a thought, can give your houseplants a little bit of break from that dry air. Tip number 12 is to watch for pests in the winter. The dry air can actually cause a resurgence of spider mites because they typically like drier air, but also you're just kind of watching your garden less. And so, inspect the undersides of your leaves. Usually this satin pothos doesn't have any, but just as an example, you wanna inspect, look in the nooks and crannies, make sure that a pest problem isn't getting just out of control in the winter, so that when spring comes, your plants are really nice and healthy, you can fertilize them, you can get them growing without just getting decimated by pests. And our final tip, tip 13, is to take a little time, whip out your pruning shears. I've got mine in my Epic Harvest apron. Link is in the description below if you like this apron. I think there's only 100 of them being sold this holiday season, so definitely please go check that out. But yeah, it's a good time to come through with your pruning snips, cut off any dead material, do some pruning, collect it all, make sure there's no diseased material, and just reshape your plants. You can even toss the clippings in a propagator if you want to get those ready for next spring. But I'm gonna go ahead and do a little bit more pruning. I hope these 13 tips were helpful. If you have any tips that you like to do in winter, definitely drop them down below. And links to anything I've mentioned will also be down below. So until next time, good luck in the garden, good luck in the houseplant garden, and keep on growing.